If you want to learn how to speak really well and how to enjoy it, imagine how you are if you give your child a Christmas present. Here you are. You're happy, aren't you? Excited, happy, really, really looking forward to the moment when they can open this present and see what's inside. That's how you should walk on stage. You have a gift. They're all there to receive it. That's how happy you need to be about it. It's not about you. It's never about you. It's about the gift you're giving to the audience.
Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Julian, today we are going to talk about your area of expertise, which is all about how to speak and be heard, how to make your voice heard. But before we get there, I just want to say something. I've been following your work for many years, and despite your success, despite your TED Talks having been viewed millions of times, the way you come across, the way you show up online, I've watched a number of interviews in preparation for this conversation. For example, the one with Stephen Bartlett on the Diary of a CEO, you always come across with a lot of humility. And I love that. So I just wanted to mention this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And actually, it's funny you should mention that word. You said my area of expertise is speaking, but it's also listening. And actually, of the two, I think listening is the more important skill, because I think in order to be a good speaker, you need to be a good listener. And one of the key spiritual, if you like, attitudes or stances or ways of being to be a good listener is humility. People who are prideful or think they know everything or want to put other people down, they don't generally be good listeners. Good listeners will see people as opportunities to learn. There's always something to learn. And so, my purpose on this planet is to grow every day a little bit somehow. And humility is a very important driver in any of us who want to get better, who want to learn, who want to grow, who want to improve on a daily basis. The moment you think you've cracked it, I think that's a dangerous moment.
And I can see the approach. And also you said that I said that your area of expertise is speaking, but then you said it's also listening, very important. And also, in preparation for this conversation, Julian, when I thought about you, I always thought about, you're right, the speaking side of things, the communication side of things. But also, I've discovered that in addition to the listening aspect as well, you are a sound expert. And I understand you have early experiences as a musician, you were a drummer. And now, for those who know nothing about this, what does it mean to be a sound expert?
Well, first of all, it does mean listening very carefully, which I've done since a young age. I think musicians do listen to the world in a slightly different way to non-musicians, because if you're playing in a band or an orchestra, any kind of a group, you have to listen to all the other instruments simultaneously and carefully. Because if you're not doing that, you're not really fitting in, playing and creating the wonderful gestalt that is a whole group of people playing in unison. And at the same time, you're doing something quite complicated yourself. So it's no surprise that the research now shows that musicians have slightly bigger brains than non-musicians. It's an area called the corpus callosum, which connects the two hemispheres. So your rational hemisphere, which perhaps is in charge of the technical thing you're doing, and your emotional hemisphere, which is more about the feeling and the aesthetics, they have to be very connected for a musician. So I guess I took that into all of my life, and I've listened very carefully all of my life to the sound around me. And when I I had a magazine publishing business in the UK, and I sold that in 2002. And I had a chance to get into what I really was excited about, which was sound. And I created a company called the Sound Agency, which I then ran for 20 years. Actually, I just closed it earlier this year to focus now on the communication skills. But I've had 20 years of helping brands to answer the question, how does your brand sound? Because it became clear to me quite early on, most of the noise that's around us in modern life, and more than half of humanity lives in cities now, so we are exposed to a lot of noise, most of us, which is incredibly damaging. And a lot of that noise is made by organizations. It's the exhaust gas of economic activity. They don't think about it, all of the transport, the construction, the industry, and so forth. It's just part of the world that we've created. But the WHO's evidence shows that noise is incredibly damaging around the world, not just to hearing, although they are reckoning that a quarter of the world's population will be hard of hearing within a decade or two, which is, 3 billion people by then, something like that, deaf or very hard of hearing. But also because of the physiological effects, because of stress, just irritation, constant irritation, lack of sleep is a huge one. If it's if you've got a noisy road outside or an aircraft going over every 3 minutes, it's very hard to sleep. And people who are sleep deprived get very ill. And then, there's more evidence showing now that constant exposure to even moderate levels of noise increases your risk of heart attack and stroke. So, teachers, for example, are working in very noisy classrooms all the time now with group work and bad acoustics. And it may well be that they're all shortening their lives by working in that environment day after day. So these are serious issues that we need to think about. And yes, so I mean, an expert, in the sense that I listen very carefully. I've developed a talent to going into environments, to built spaces particularly, and really listening to the soundscape that's in there and thinking, how could this be improved? What are the noises we could remove? What sound could we inject into the space to make it joyful and beautiful and a space that you'd be happy to be in, whether you're working, playing, learning, healing, whatever it is. So yeah, that's been a huge part of my life. And of course, the listening part of that is what took me into this journey on communication skills. So I've got a passion now, which is to generate listening in the world. That's what I'm about. Speaking, I love it. It's very important. I've stood on hundreds and hundreds of stages. I've done 5 TEDs, 11 TEDx's, you name it. And I love speaking, and I'm happy to teach people those skills. To me, nevertheless, the foundational skill is listening, because what's the point in being a great speaker if nobody's listening?
Yeah, interesting point. And we will be talking about also the speaking side of things today, because I know that's what our listeners are interested in. And you mentioned like 5 TED Talks, many other TEDx talks. By the way, I watched all of them, the TED Talks, the TEDx Talks. There's also one where you talk about sound, and you made me aware of so many things that I wasn't aware of. Also, you mentioned something about with our earbuds, to be careful what kind of earbuds we use and at what level. I wasn't aware of this thing, so thank you for that. And now, TED Talks, many people know you for a very famous TED Talk. So in combined, your TED and TEDx Talks have been viewed, what is it, 150 million times, more than that, like massive.
So now it's unbelievable.
Yeah, unbelievable. Now, on this podcast, we had a colleague of mine a few months ago, Phil Wicknell, and on that episode, we celebrated him hitting the 1 million view mark, which for us, it was like an incredible milestone, 1 million views. Now, you have more than 150 million views, and the one in particular, how to speak so that people want to listen, that has been viewed, just that one so many million times. Julian, why do you think that particular talk was so successful? Because I don't know, there must be a reason. We're not talking about 100 people. We're not even talking about 1 million people. It's like hundreds of millions of people watching their talk. What happened there? What do you think?
Well, I think there are a huge number of people in the world who don't feel heard. They don't feel heard. They don't feel people are listening to them. They don't feel they can make the difference. I think there's an innate understanding that we have this incredible instrument that we all play, which is how I described it in that TED talk, the voice, the human voice, the instrument we all play. And yet we don't teach children how to use it in school. We don't teach speaking or listening. We teach reading and writing, but not speaking or listening. You tell me why that is. I cannot understand it. You know, if we taught kids how to listen first, how much more of their education would they take in, for goodness sake? If we taught them how to speak effectively, how much more productive and powerful and effective would they be through their lives? But we confuse these very important skills, and they are both skills. We confuse them with capabilities. Yeah, of course I can speak. Everybody can speak. Yeah, I've got a voice. Yeah, it's just what I've got, you know. Well, no, not true. Speaking is a great skill. It's a skill you can practice, master, and so is listening, by the way. And they're skills which, you know, start from what you've been given. You know, in terms of speaking, we have a physiology, each of us. We have resonant chambers in our bodies. We have vocal cords. But, you know, there are actors with wonderful voices and delivery of all shapes and sizes. You don't have to be huge or broad or have a massive chest or anything like that in order to be able to speak powerfully and well. The smallest people can develop tremendous voices. So it's a skill you can develop. You know, when you think of what the human voice is capable of, you know, I often think of that. I mean, go from, you know, Robert Plant to Pavarotti to, you know, whoever, you know, Aretha Franklin. Just think of what that voice is capable of and how much more each of us might be able to do with the instrument we've been given. But I mean, less so for this podcast, of course, because it's about speaking. But, you know, I do talk, say I'm talking to 1,000 CEOs, which I do quite often. I do keynotes and workshops around the world on these things. So 1,000 CEOs, I'll say, how many of you use your voice in your work? For how many of you is your voice important? You stand in front of people, you present, you sell, whatever it is. Everybody puts their hand up. Okay. How many of you have had formal vocal tuition? About 3 out of 1,000. I mean, it is less than 3% of a room, however many it is. And I just think, why? If your voice really matters, if it determines your outcomes in life, like you have to sell or persuade or inspire or lead or whatever it might be, even parent, then why not get training in it? You wouldn't go on stage to do a piano recital in the Royal Albert Hall having never had a lesson. And it's the same thing with, you know, I see CEOs walk on stage and stand behind a lectern with notes and read. And I just think, no, you're not looking at there's no eye contact. There's no connection there at all. You know, I'm not a fan of reading writing. I think reading writing is different from speaking. And, you know, I've seen that so many times. Or people turning around and talking to the screen, you know, the most common error that I've ever seen. Or people who've got fidgets or tics that you know, walking round and round on the spot, or leaning from one side to the other, or whatever it might be. So simple to correct most of those things, especially with a coach. But even if you don't have a coach, you know, video yourself and become your own coach. So easy to do nowadays. And I can guarantee, you know, I mean, many of the people watching this podcast probably do this already, but if you haven't, video yourself giving a talk and you'll very quickly be going, oh my goodness, I didn't know I did that. So it's a skill. It's a skill that needs to be developed, and it's a skill that determines, I always say, just 3 things in life: your happiness, your effectiveness, and your well-being. 3 quite important things.
Julian, you mentioned, if I understood correctly, you made a distinction between skills and capabilities. Is that correct? So what's the difference?
Well, take listening, for example. Hearing is a capability. You don't have to do anything to hear. As long as you've got undamaged hearing, you hear everything. From 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, you hear in a sphere all around you. You can hear what's behind you. You can't see what's behind you. You can hear in the dark. You can't see in the dark. So hearing is our primary warning sense. It always has been, and it is for every vertebrate on this planet. There isn't a vertebrate on this planet that doesn't have ears. There are plenty that don't have eyes, who live in the dark, but they all have ears. So hearing is a capability, and we can rely on it. Listening is different. It's a skill. It's different from hearing. And just in the same way, yes, you have a voice. You can mumble. You can, use you knows and I means and you know what I means and and ums and have no kind of prosody at all and be very boring to listen to. All sorts of things are possible with the voice if you're lazy about it. But then you can get trained and you can develop. And, people always say to me things like, oh, you've got such a lovely voice. Yeah, I trained. I've done weeks of training on stages and in groups and with people, multi-day training events and so forth in the past. And then I've trained myself and I've worked one-to-one with a voice coach and so forth. So you learn things. You learn things about breathing, diaphragm control, projection, and pitch and timbre and so forth, which are important things to understand. So, I talk about the vocal toolbox. That's the analogy I used in that TED Talk, the number 6 best viewed of all time TED Talk, amazingly. And the vocal toolbox is something I do encourage everybody, particularly everybody watching this podcast, to open and have a rummage around in, because many people never open it and they think this voice is the voice I've been given and that's it. So sad.
Now, Julian, that toolbox, you said, for example, I am in front of 1,000 CEOs and only 3 of them say they had some sort of training from a vocal perspective. What's inside, and feel free to go as deep as you want, or if you want to stay high level, that's fine. What's inside that toolbox? What do we need to know for us to be able to use our voice to get a message across more effectively?
Well, there are many, many tools in the toolbox, and the first one, of course, is breath. I wonder how many people listening to this have a breathing practice. That is a very good thing to do. In the modern world, we do a lot of sitting. We don't move a great deal. It may be that you've got a daily routine of exercise or 3 times a week or something like that. But outside of that, do you ever focus on your breath, pure and simple? People who do yoga perhaps will have a breathing practice, but it's a very good thing to develop because your voice is just breath. That's all it is. And if you increase your lung capacity, you're giving yourself more fuel to make the voice more and more powerful. So breath is very important in the first place. And, most people, most of the time, breathe very, very shallow, just to the top of the lungs almost. It's kind of almost not breathing at all. Whereas, to take a big breath in and then let it out, it's an enormously relaxing thing to do apart from anything else, but it's also something you can practice, that kind of resonant breathing, lengthening the in-breath and the out-breath every day, a little bit every day. Count them in and count them out and get bigger numbers so that eventually you can count to, 20 as you breathe in and 20 as you breathe out. And that's really helping your lung capacity. So that's, it's an obvious thing to a degree, but I bet many people haven't thought about it in terms of voice. And, there's another one that is also very obvious, which is stance, posture. It's very important to have your vocal cords vertical. They don't do very well when you stretch them out like this, which we often do if we lean forward and we're on the phone. You're talking like this. And so my vocal cords are stretched. And of course, if I put my head right back, the vocal cords get completely compressed. So they don't work very well if they're not vertical. And there's a great exercise. I mean, I'll give you this one for everybody to take away because it really helps. It's a visualization that I've used for years and years, which is to imagine that there's a string attached to the top of your head and everything is dangling from that string. And immediately, as soon as you visualize that, your shoulders go down and back. You know, you probably, through the day, we end up with the shoulders up around our ears, don't we? So the shoulders go down and back. And if you're standing, everything will be vertical, and yet you're loose because you're dangling from a string. It's not stiff, it's not tense, it's not, locked in position. You can move, but you're relaxed and everything's vertical, stacked one above the other. That's a lovely visualization. And it also is nice to watch somebody on a stage presenting who looks calm, confident, and isn't distracting by doing the little things I was talking about earlier, the walk of death round and round and round, or leaning or fidgeting in some way. I mean, if you're a pacer, like Tony Robbins or somebody, pace, that's great. That's who you are. If you're a tiger on stage, you can, get that energy going. That's absolutely fine. Hell for the cameraman, because they have to keep panning left and right. But if that's what you are, then be yourself. However, I'm not. I like to stand nice and still and just use my hands, my face, and my voice to put the message across. So I also visualize roots going from my feet into the ground, which keep me locked, really rooted. And people often say to me, "Oh, you look so solid in on stage." Well, that's why. So these visualizations can help. That's just two of the tools in the vocal toolbox, and we haven't even got to the voice. There's tone or timbre, which is, something you can change with a coach. If you've got a squeaky, scratchy voice, you can work on that with a coach. There's pitch. We tend to vote for politicians with deeper voices, that the evidence has shown. And there's a reason for that. It's genetic. It's very, very old. Big things are more dangerous than little things, generally speaking. And big things have got deeper voices than little things. So we associate deep with significant because it could be dangerous. So, you want to worry more about an elephant than a mouse. Therefore, deep voices are taken more seriously. It's a very old, inbuilt reflex, that one. And so you can practice getting your voice, getting the bass onto your voice, not in a sort of, I'm not mentioning, I'm not suggesting everybody speaks like this, but in a natural way, you can start to learn to resonate in the chest. Of course, your voice comes from your vocal cords in your throat. But, I can talk in my head voice up here. It's a nice light voice. There's nothing wrong with that. Or I can move down into my chest and suddenly you get the bass because I'm resonating in this much bigger chamber and it sounds more authoritative. That's just the way it works. So that's the thing you can practice, is where you're resonating from while staying in the register we're all in all the time, which is the modal register. Well, I say all the time, don't do vocal fry is another good rule. Vocal fry sounds a bit like, it's late. Oh, hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be here. No, don't do that. The research shows that people who do vocal fry are considered to be less intelligent, less employable, less, a lot of things. It's not a great sound. So try not to go into vocal fry. You've got this wonderful instrument. It's such a shame to be speaking like this, So, that's just a few of the tools in the toolbox. And the other one, I just mentioned one other one, which is space or silence. A lot of people in cities are uncomfortable with silence because there's noise around us all the time, and particularly younger people who are generally surrounded by 2 or 3 inputs at the same time now. I can't read a book and listen to music at the same time. I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me, but that's my generation. I'm a boomer. Possibly, Gen Z or Gen Z people can do that because we are very adaptable. Well, if that's you, it's important to give yourself a break once in a while. I do recommend a couple of minutes of silence a couple of times a day. because it recalibrates your ears, recalibrates your whole relationship with sound, and it makes you more comfortable in a talk to not have to fill every moment with ums and ers and you know what it means and so forth. Those things tend to come out of a slight discomfort with silence. And, you know, when I'm standing on a stage, I can stop for the longest time. I mean, I'll stop very briefly now. Now, this is video, so everybody can see we're still here. If you're listening, I'm sorry about that. That's then called dead air on the radio, and they get very antsy about it because people tend to think they've detuned or lost the signal and they start messing about and go somewhere else. But on a stage, if I'm standing there, I can stop for, I mean, literally a minute. And if I'm not looking uncomfortable, I'm not going red and sweating and getting flustered and so forth, I'm just looking calm. Everybody in the audience is fine with that. They're all thinking, oh, I wonder what I'll have for lunch. It's nice and peaceful here, isn't it? You know, it's a lovely break. There's nothing wrong with silence. And indeed, it can be a very powerful tool to use when you're talking. So that's some of the tools in the vocal toolbox. And the more conscious you become about these things, the more you practice using them, the more you are a master playing an instrument, as opposed to somebody who's got a bunch of stuff in a toolbox and doesn't know what they are and is just making it up as they go along.
When it comes to embracing silence, it's also the comfort paradox. Often what's comfortable for us as speakers is not comfortable for the audience, and vice versa. What's not comfortable for us, like for example, pausing, embracing the silence, is comfortable for the audience. We want to do it for them. And Julian, I also wanted to ask you something. Going back to breathing, you said that breathing, among other things, helps you calm down, and many people feel nervous before presenting or during a presentation. Do you have any recommendations in terms of where to breathe from? For example, breathing from your chest, breathing from your belly. Any recommendations from that perspective?
Well, actually, breathing, of course, is a great antidote to nerves. And by the way, I think it's worth saying most people have an unhealthy relationship with nerves. Nerves are there to be embraced. That just means you're excited and you're being charged up with adrenaline and all sorts of happy, you know, very useful chemicals in your system. And that's good. You know, if I feel nervous before I go on stage, I embrace it. And because it means I'm on top form, I'm going to perform better. My body's really giving me every tool it can in order to make me perform at my maximum. So that's the first thing about nerves. And then, yep, breath is very, very good at calming nerves down. A deep breath. I have a little acronym I give people about when they're going on stage, which is BESS. And the B is breathe. So as you're walking to the spot, you know, where it's lit, where you're going to stand, you've checked it out beforehand, you know where you're going, you're walking that big breath in. And the answer is in through the nose, and you want to feel your tummy expand. So most people think of breath as happening in the chest because that's where the lungs are. But if you watch a baby breathing, you'll see that the baby's tummy goes in and out as it's breathing. Its chest doesn't move that much. And we lose contact with that as we get older. So it's a great practice. You know, you can practice lying on the floor with books on your tummy and make them move up and down as you breathe, that kind of thing. That's a good breathing practice. So a big breath in, your tummy going out, and then that's the B of BESS. And then the E is expand your awareness. So to take in the whole room. I really am not a proponent of talking to one person at a time. I've seen many speakers get stuck on one person, actually, just, you know, talking to that one person who starts to feel pretty uncomfortable after a while. Why is he staring at me the whole time, you know? So, you know, whilst I scan around, I'm always taking in the whole room. And if you keep your attention as wide as that, you can spot any, you know, areas of discomfort, negativity, tiredness, whatever it might be, and you can spot areas of real positive reaction and so forth. So it becomes much easier to get a sense for the whole room. The first S is stance. So we've done that. String in the head, stand there. So you come on, you breathed, you've expanded, you're in your stance. And the second S, smile. I'm happy to be here. You know, if you come on stage, you get smiles back from the audience every time. And you've immediately made a link. And they're thinking, oh, he looks happy to be here. This should be all right. He's confident. So you immediately get a good expectation going, as opposed to, you know, looking terrified or perturbed or uncertain. So Bess is very good. And I think breathing to the stomach is a great way to practice your breathing.
Before we continue with this episode, I just want to share a few resources that I think will be super useful for you. The first one is check out either my book, Confident Presenter, or my colleague Phil Wakenall's book, Business Presentation Revolution, or both. These are books for business owners and leaders who want to take their presentation skills to a higher level. To make the most of the books, take the Confident Presenter Scorecard, which is an online tool that allows you to assess your presentation skills for free in less than 3 minutes. And then also, at the moment, I'm running a series of free presentation skills web classes, and I'd love to see you there. The links are in the show notes. Now, let's go back to the episode. Perfect, thank you. And again, talking about voice, before you go on a stage, Julian, is there anything you do anything practical that you do to warm up your voice before speaking in public?
Yes, I do those. You know, the warm-up exercises I did in that TED talk, which anybody can view, they're what I do before I go on stage, exactly those. Especially the siren, the yo, that one, which is really important. It'll pitch your voice down by getting on for a tone. And it also reveals any discontinuities in your voice as you're going up and down in that huge sine wave of the highest you can go to the lowest you can go. So yes, all of those, the la-las and bop and brrs and all those things, I do all of those backstage before I go on. And if backstage is too close to the audience, I'll be out in the back corridor or in a loo or somewhere doing those things. So also I would recommend stretching. You know, I'm lucky enough to live with Jane, who's a four-time world champion martial artist and yoga expert. And she keeps me young with the stretching exercises that she has me doing multiple times a week. I think stretching is the most important thing about not aging, about staying young, about staying healthy. Particularly given the amount of time we sit. So there are various stretches that I'll do, touching my toes, moving around my legs, circling around my legs like that, stretching from side to side, forward and back, circling my arms. These kind of things, they all create, again, good body chemistry. You get good hormones coming around, endorphins and so forth start happening, so you feel good. And you also, if you want to do some power poses, that's a good time to do it. Amy Cuddy's TED Talk, which has, created some controversy and now has been, I think, pretty clearly validated. I think the results have been replicated. So it is true to say that a power pose, which is just making you bigger, as big as you can be, releases testosterone, which is a chemical that makes you feel more confident and more strong. So that's a very good way to walk on stage as well. I mean, not walk on stage doing a power pose, do that backstage and then walk on stage.
Yeah. And Julia, for the very few people who haven't watched that TED Talk yet, can you give us just maybe you can pick one or two warm-up vocal exercises that you do and just to show them live here, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, I'll just run through them all very quickly. The first is breathing, which is to breathe in through the nose and then sigh the breath out. You can raise your arms if you like, don't have to. So you can do that a few times. That starts to get your rib cage moving. Then we have a couple for the lips. The first being bo, 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 like that. And the second being, so those really wake your lips up and give you that piece of equipment fully on tap for you. Then two for the tongue. The first being la, 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 right from the back of the palate to the front of the mouth. So that's like press ups for the tongue, really. And the second being roll and R, which I took months to learn how to do, but you can learn how to do it. So, and that's champagne for the tongue, that one. And then the final one is the siren, which I mentioned before, which is where you go we or, where the we is as high as you can go and the or is as low as you can go. So you go or, or, like that. And as I said, it'll pitch your voice down. You could hear my voice has just gone down a tone. And it also really reduces and eliminates any discontinuities of big gravelly bits in your voice as you do that. So those are the vocal warm-ups that I use. It doesn't take long. It's 2 minutes, and you've really put yourself in the best position with a voice that's warmed up and running and ready to go.
There's something, again, if I think about the way we use our voice, there's something I notice with many people. And I have to say, Julian, I'm not sure if there's any geographical link to this, but I do see it more in the UK than, for example, I come from Italy. I don't see it that much in Italy. It's when people end their sentences as if they are questions.
Yeah, it's called high-rise terminal, and it's an infestation which came, I think, originally from Australia, but it's also common in California and has, through television, become a habit with a lot of people. So every sentence ends as if it were a question. And that's an unfortunate intonation because it elides the question, is that okay? It's asking for approval the whole time, effectively. So it's rather a subservient, weak way to speak. A sentence, if it's a powerful sentence, goes down at the end. Not a sentence, if it's a powerful sentence, goes down at the end. Nope, doesn't work. So try to avoid high-rising terminal. I mean, it used to be called Australian questioning intonation, but it is one to avoid. And the other thing to avoid is any form of repetition or doing the same thing over and over and over again in a talk. Now, that could be with prosody or prosody, intonation being a very important part of prosody. Prosody is your intonation, the gaps between the words, the pace, the whole way that you express a text or whatever it is you're saying, if it were written down. It's all the stuff you add that makes it much better than reading it. So prosody can be repetitive. I mean, I've heard people talking where every sentence does this. And indeed, after a while, you start to get rather tired of it. And if you keep talking like this, you're going to lull people into a trance. And you end up with a whole audience in a catatonic state because everything's the same. And just as bad is a monotone where everything is all on one note. That's why we have the word monotonous, monotone, boring. So it's worth practicing variety all the time with volume, with pitch, with prosody, with pace, all these things. These are all the tools of a master, and if you master them, you will give a great talk.
One of the things I heard you say, and I think that's important because many people think that for them to be able to be good communicators, good speakers, they need to be extroverts. I heard you say that you are not an extrovert, you are an introvert. Tell me more about how do you see these? Because we know that you can be an excellent communicator without being an extrovert. Tell me more about this from your perspective.
Well, funnily enough, most of the speakers that I've met on the speaking circuit as I travel around the world giving keynotes are introverts. So they've developed a technique of delivering on stage something that's powerful, impactful, and so forth. Many of them are not like that in private life. They're much quieter people. I mean, the obvious example being Susan Cain, who, gave that wonderful talk about being an extrovert and about the power of extroverts, and made a point of talking about how uncomfortable she felt giving that talk. Then, if you think of Gary Vaynerchuk or somebody like that, he probably is, I have never met Gary, but he probably is more like that in his personal life. He's a pretty lively, electric fellow, I think, just from stage. Of course, that might be wrong, because a lot of the people I've seen who are, quite dynamic off stage come off stage and they're much quieter and more reserved. So, it is not necessary to be a sort of ninja extrovert type person. I'm not. When I'm talking, I'm quite quiet. I mean, the TED Talks are like that. They're not, I don't leap about, smash my fist on things, shout at people. And, I don't get the audience all riled up. Other people can do that. It's great. Other people are even quieter than me, which is great too, like Susan Cain. So, I think it's fine. I talk about the 4 foundations of powerful speaking, HAIL, where the H is honesty, being clear and straight in what you say. The A is authenticity. It's being yourself. And I think it's much more important to be yourself than it is to try and create some sort of fake persona. You can, if you're a quiet person and you want to do some sort of inspiring speech, you can certainly push it in that direction, but without leaving your truth, still standing in your own truth, but just right at the edge of the excited end of your truth. That's fine. That'll be enough. You don't have to become somebody else. It comes across, if people are pretending, acting, performing, it does come across. And I love Toastmasters as an organization around the world. I think it does magnificent work. And if anybody's wondering how can I practice speaking, well, go and join Toastmasters. That's what they're there for. The only criticism I ever have of Toastmasters is I think the performance side of it is emphasized a great deal at sometimes the expense of authenticity. Somebody they practice to the degree where it's a performance done by a persona rather than an authentic expression of somebody who's generating it in real time from their soul. And I'm a big fan of that. So, I didn't say the I is integrity. If you say it, you do it. And the L is love, wishing people well and giving a gift. I often, this is a little thing that always creates a reaction when I'm talking. I talk about, if you want to learn how to speak really well and how to enjoy it, imagine how you are if you give your child a Christmas present. Here you are. You're happy, aren't you? Excited, happy, really, really looking forward to the moment when they can open this present and see what's inside. That's how you should walk on stage. You have a gift. They're all there to receive it. That's how happy you need to be about it. It's not about you. It's never about you. It's about the gift you're giving to the audience. And if you see it in that way, then you'll come on stage leaping on and excited to get into taking them on this journey, moving them from where they are now to where they're going to be in 10 or 20 minutes or whatever it is. It's much, much more powerful way to be.
Following on from this idea of I'm an introvert, but we as introverts, we can speak well, we can do a good job on a stage. Now, you've spoken in front of thousands of people. Now, what happens, at least in my experience, with most business professionals and business leaders, unless you are Tony Robbins, then you speak in front of a few people. It could be 50, it could be 100, 150 people. That's the average, or most speaking engagements. That's what we're talking about in the business world. Now, how does it feel to you to walk on a stage and you've got thousands of people looking at you? Just personally, how does that feel to you?
I love it, not for ego reasons, but because it is a moment when I am the most conscious I mean, if you've got, I think the biggest audience I've ever spoken to is 11,000. If you've got 11,000 people looking at you, you'd better be conscious. If you're not conscious in that moment, you've got a problem, really. And I love pushing the boundaries of consciousness. I love to become more and more conscious of what I'm doing, what I'm saying, how I'm saying it, how I'm standing, what I'm gesturing with, all of those things. To me, speaking is all about, it's a journey of consciousness. And, if you kind of lose contact with that and you just walk on and deliver a thing, that's so sad, because there are people there waiting for the gift. They're all looking at you, and they can tell if you're not on it, if you're not really engaged, if you're not absolutely present in that moment. So that's why it's very important to do things like rehearse, because otherwise your head will be full of all sorts of stuff about, oh, don't forget this, and don't remember, oh, I've got to remember that thing, and oh, did I do that right, and all this kind of stuff. You don't need that. I think my first TED talk, which was about the 4 effects of sound, way back when, I think I probably delivered that to my daughter Alice at the time. She probably knew it as well as I did. I mean, I think she saw that talk 20 times at least. Now, I'm not saying know it to the point where it becomes boring or ritual. I'm saying know it to the point where you can jazz with it. Whatever aids you use, from cue cards, don't use a script, but, cue cards, yep, fine, with bullet points on them. I use slides, and I have presenter view in front of me so I can see what's coming next, so I don't lose my way. And I've designed it very carefully. I could probably do it without that anyway, but I always design these talks very carefully for each venue. Or if you're very, very brave and you want to use a memory palace or some sort of memory-based system, we're not all, I think Alain de Botton is my favorite example of somebody who walked on stage with no notes, no aids whatsoever, spoke for 18 minutes brilliantly, and then walked off again. I don't know how you do that. I wouldn't trust my memory to do that. But, maybe if you have an eidetic memory or a fantastic memory, you can do that. Whatever you're using, the important thing is to be there in the moment, in relationship with the audience, and jazz. It is like jazz. I mean, in jazz, not free jazz, but, in more traditional jazz, there's a tune, there are chords. People know what's going on, but they can extemporize at the same time and respond to the audience, to the moment, to how they feel. Sometimes I'll go off on a little tangent about something. Other times I won't mention it at all. Just depends how I feel. It's always the same kind of material, but it's different every single time because of the jazz. And I love that about it.
And for you, Julian, how many, because this is personal, what works for you may not work for me, and vice versa, and for other people the same. How many rehearsals do you need for you to get to a point where you own your content, you've internalized it, and you can jazz with it, on average?
I'd say for me, it's probably 2 or 3 now, where I'll do run-throughs. I use slide builds. I'm kind of very adept with Keynote on the Mac, and so I know exactly how to make the slides do all sorts of clever things to emphasize what I'm saying. The slides are not the speaker, and that's something. Don't use bullets. Don't put your whole text on the slides. The slides are just there to back you up, because hearing something and seeing it at the same time, that's more powerful and more memorable. So it's good. But my slides generally are just a picture with a single word, if there's a word at all. Not putting too much on a slide, that's another common mistake I see people make, especially in business. Oh my goodness, where you get 4 graphs and a load of explanatory text all on the same slide, and you just think, oh, what on earth is all that? So, 1 graph per slide, keep it simple, really making sure that people can relate to the content that you're giving them, the words, the pictures, whatever it is, the sounds. I use a lot of sound as well. So, yeah, I think two or three probably, because, I'm saying it's not the same every time. I change it every time, but I don't radically. It's not a whole new topic. If I were giving a whole new topic, I mean, I've got a big webcast, a big webinar coming up with lots and lots of American architects in a month. And I've got to create a whole chunk of new content about biophilia, then the way of bringing nature indoors, of re-establishing our connection with nature in architecture. So, that one I'll probably run, I don't know, 5 or 6 times at least until I feel really comfortable with it. But it's when you've got to a stage where you think, okay, I pretty much, as long as you've got cues and you're not going to have a break in the chain and get set adrift on stage, which, is possible with memory. But if you've got slides or cue cards or something, bullets, some sort of, or, just a comfort monitor, which has got the outline of your talk on it, so you know what's coming next pretty much, then you can fairly relax about these things and really enjoy it. And that is the most important thing.
Yeah. And a big, as you said, a big problem I see, again, especially in business, is that people don't rehearse. Maybe if they do something, they think about what to say. So they open up their PowerPoint or Keynote and they say, okay, on this slide, I will be talking about this, and here I will be talking about that. But rehearsing means repeating it out loud from the beginning.
Totally. Rehearsing is rehearsing full size, as if for real.
Yeah.
So ideally, if you've got a living room with a TV in it, then throw the slides onto the TV behind you and use your laptop as presenter view. So you're not turning around and looking at the screen. Don't do that. And then, talk it through. And if you're gesticulating, gesticulate full size, not, that I'm going to punch the air. No, because you'll probably go on stage and do that instead of, which is what you need to rehearse. So yes, rehearse full size, full scale, with all the words, as if for real. And the other thing, of course, that gives you is timing. And, I've seen, even on the TED stage, I've seen people who get that badly wrong because they go on and they're rather arrogant and they haven't rehearsed. This is in the old days. I mean, they wouldn't let somebody do that now. They rehearse everybody to pieces at TED now. But in the old days, it was much more possible for somebody to turn up and do a TED talk. And, it's very embarrassing to be given the hook when you're a third of the way through your material and your 18 minutes is already gone. And they say, I'm terribly sorry. It's somebody else's turn now. And but no, that was it. That was your time. And, if they're not that strict, it is just rude to overrun. I've seen it happen so many times at business meetings. I once went to one in Turkey where they were 2 hours late after the first 2 talks. And it was, what? This is going to go on for a week. So, I think it's just rude to do that. And you need to make sure if you're booked to do an hour or 30 minutes, that's how long your talk is. I'm very religious about finishing on time.
Never go long. It's a matter of respect to your audience, to the other speakers, if there are other speakers. Julian, you say that the word so is very powerful in communication.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Summarizing what you've heard is a great way of showing that you receive it, that you've got it, and checking that you have actually got it right. Because very often what we hear is not what was sent. We will interpret it, or we misheard it, or, we're putting some sort of a spin on it. So it's a great way of checking in a conversation. So what I understand, Andrea, what you just said is this. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, good. So you can kind of close doors in the long corridor of a conversation behind you, lock down things that you both agree on, which is very important. Also in a meeting, if you don't have a so person in the meeting. So we've all agreed, I think, to this. Can we now move on to item 2? If you don't have a so person in the meeting, it can be a very, very long meeting, round and round in circles. I think summarizing is a very, very important aspect of communicating, of showing, of checking that you've received. because it's not safe, that process. It's, yes, when we're speaking, we're trying to get the ball over the net, but we don't know what happens on the other side. And it's very important that that person then confirms back to us they received what we sent. And then we know we can move on to the next thing. And that's why I love the word so. And I got very despondent. It's not happening so much now, I'm very glad to say, but I got very despondent when, for a couple of years, everybody was starting every sentence with the word so. What's your name? So, I'm John. I'm sorry? You're John because I asked you? So means therefore. It's a logical sequence. And there was no therefore. I've even seen people walk onto the TED stage. So, no, you haven't said anything yet. There's no logic here. No. I wanted to form a society for the preservation of the word so for a long time, but it's dying out, thank goodness, that abuse of the word so. Very important word.
What are you up to at the moment? I saw on your website, and that was some time ago, that you were writing or you were about to publish a new book, but I haven't seen it yet. Any exciting projects coming up?
Yeah, definitely. Well, a couple of very exciting things. I have a new book coming out. It will be out in late spring next year, published in the UK by Quercus and in America by Grand Central. And they are quite excited about it. And so am I. And I'm using quite in a very understated British way. I'm very excited about it, actually. It's called Sound Effects. And it's all about the relationship between humanity and sound. How sound affects us, why we need to listen, the wonders of sound in all sorts of ways. The sound of our planet, the sound of living things, the sound of us, the sound of the universe. I mean, not many people know that the space is actually full of sound. It's not a vacuum. It's a very dilute plasma. And if you have a sound which is low enough frequency with a wavelength of light years, that can work perfectly well through a very dilute plasma. So if you had ears as big as a galaxy, the world, the whole cosmos is alive with sound. It's just very, very low frequency, far too low for us to hear. So that kind of stuff, fascinates me, and it's been a joy writing about the sound of all these things. It ends with a chapter on silence and how to achieve it and why it's important, and forest bathing and nature sound and all that kind of thing. So yeah, that'll be out early next year. And the other big thing I'm working on right now is an AI version of me, which we are in the throes of completing. I hope it'll be done in the next few weeks. I'm working with a wonderful bunch of guys on the west coast of America called Ally Studios, and we are going to have a me in your pocket as a personal trainer on speaking and listening skills, available 24/7, always responsive, and also nagging, by the way. It won't just answer questions. It'll be saying, Andrea, have you done that exercise we agreed last week that you were going to do? So it will be, quite a powerful coach with all of my ideas, IP, books, talks, everything, all rammed in there. So it'll be full of useful tips and tricks. So those are the things that are coming up for next year, which I'm very excited about.
Looking forward to Sound Effects and Julian Treasure AI, the AI version of you. And talking about books, Julian, beyond your own resources, and I recommend, and we are going to include them in the show notes. If you think about what we talked about today, so mainly from a speaking, and if you want also listening perspective, you can pick one of the two. Do you have any book recommendations? Any books that you think our listeners should read, either from a speaking perspective or from a listening perspective?
There's a book called The Mysticism of Sound and Music by Hazrat Inayat Khan, who was a Sufi master. And it's a really fascinating book if you're into kind of a spiritual relationship with sound and the harmony of the spheres and all that kind of thing. There's a book called The Great Animal Orchestra by Bernie Krause, a very old friend of mine, which is a wonderful exposure of the way in which animals relate to each other in sound and how they all pick their place and their time to sing or call in the knowledge of everything else that's going on around them. So just like an orchestra, everything has its place. And it's a fascinating book about that. Nada Brahma, The World is Sound, by Joachim Ernst Berendt. Another quite spiritual book. He was a great jazz musician and also writer. But this book is extraordinary, and it's quite a trip to go on. And also I like very much In Pursuit of Silence by George Prochnik, which is a great book about noise and the modern world that we live in. And finally, a lovely, lovely book, Silence by Sarah Maitland, one of my favorite books of all time. It's such a beautiful book. She's a brilliant writer, and it's an exploration of the power and importance of silence. So all of those really, I think, are great places to be if you're interested in sound and listening particularly. You can look at, Chris Anderson's book, TED Talks, is a great book for anybody who's interested in designing good talks and working towards perhaps doing a TEDx or a TED Talk. So that's always a good place to start.
Amazing. Normally, I'm happy with one book recommendation. You gave us 5 or 6. That's amazing. Thank you very much, Julia. We're going to include them in the show notes. Let's close with this. If you think about everything we talked about quite a few things today. What's the most important thing? What's the one thing you would like our listeners to take away from this conversation?
Actually, I'm going to jump out of what we talked about it because we didn't talk about this, and I think it's incredibly important. Everybody's listening is unique. I won't go into why that is now, but it is, because we listen through a set of filters. And that means that it's vital to ask the question, what's the listening I'm speaking into? Whether it's one person or 11,000. If you ask that question, you will become sensitive to the answer, because the listening will change from person to person and over time as well. From audience to audience, through the day, the listening changes. And it's very important to sensitize yourself to the listening that you're speaking into. That is how you hit the bullseye instead of missing the target altogether. It's the biggest secret I know about public speaking.
Thank you very much, Julian. I wish you all the best with your your future projects, the upcoming book, and the AI version of you. Thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciated it, and all the very best.
Thanks, Andrea. It was a great pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.